It was evening as the sky turned thick shades of orange and purple, and the house was tensely silent. I lay on my bed like a prisoner in jail, fixing my gaze on the ceiling as thoughts of what had happened to our family filled my mind. My mother was in the hospital, and my father, leaving her to suffer, had stolen a young mistress, and now she, the treacherous Valentina, lived under the same roof as me and Dad. Every threatening look he made toward her made me angry. I hated Dad for his choices, for betraying the one who had given her whole life to him. I watched him turn to Valentina with a smile as if nothing had happened, as if their real life was what it really was. The scars on my mother's heart were invisible, but to me they were the scars he had bestowed on both of us. Slowly the idea of revenge was maturing in me. I needed to deal with this situation and finally fight back against what had happened in our home. I knew that Valentina had not only won my father's heart, but also sought to undermine all of our dictated positions. I watched her attempts at rapport, but this girl was more than just manipulative. She knew how to create an atmosphere where everyone obeyed her wishes. I was going over my strategy in my mind, at one point wanting to make a connection with her to get her out in the open. I decided to show signs of attention that might help me discover her true intentions. I started eating at the same table with her more often, catching her eye when she looked unsure. Every time I touched her hand while serving her food or casually touched her as I walked by, I felt a fierce passion building up inside me. I realized it wasn't love, but a lust for revenge. I didn't want her to feel comfortable in this house where my mother suffered the consequences of her appearances. I was floating through a forum where irreversible things were conspiring on the surface. One day, as I sat on the couch, Valentina came and sat next to me, her knee barely touching mine. It was a conscious proximity she knew well, and I had the tempting urge to push her away. But instead, I began to give in to my intention. I started complimenting her on how good she looked in that outfit, how her hair shone in the light. I could feel her confidence growing, and the one thought going around in my head was, I'm going to crack you up. I froze in her gaze as soon as she noticed my interest. She responded playfully, like a game. I noticed that Valentina felt more comfortable and desirable under my attention, and that only fueled my plan. I knew she saw me as an opportunity to raise her status, since she'd already attached herself to my father. I had to take advantage of it. One evening, as the house was sinking into semi-darkness, I approached her as I passed by and held up her hand, watching her flinch in surprise. That momentary pause, the leaden heaviness in the air, sharpened the growing arousal. I played with her like a cat with a mouse. I could feel her attention shifting to me, and it was beginning to stir something darker in me. You know, I said, trying to speak softly, there might be a lack of understanding in our house. You could put all your energy into building something positive with us. I didn't know what she was going to say in response, but when her lips opened slightly, I felt a childlike excitement. There was tension between us, tension so strong you could cut it with a knife. I felt the blood rush to my cheeks, and even her proximity seemed tantalizing, and with it came a thirst for revenge. It wasn't love, it was a struggle, and in one accented moment, when I was no longer in control of my feelings, she leaned closer. What are you going to do? She said softly, her voice full of anticipation. But there was more than desire in that question, there was also a challenge. In that instant, I felt I had found that line where darkness and light began to mingle. I leaned into her, her scent was sweet, pulling me into the abyss, and I knew that by staying in this moment I would lose all boundaries. Gradually, a note of revenge for this betrayal sounded. I had to challenge her, and the time had come. I was sinking deeper and deeper into my own schemes, and as I prepared to make my move in this way, the world around us seemed to freeze. I knew there was something deeper ahead of us, and by the time I could push it away from me, it was too late. At the same time, I realized that I was playing not only with her designs, but also with my own moral compass. I was plunging into a darkness where my own secret wars were escalating, and it could turn into absolute chaos. And in this struggle, only one thing was clear. I was preparing to make a move that would change everything. There was a battle waiting for me on the horizon, and for each of our secret meetings, I knew it wouldn't just be a game. It was about turning my feelings into a dream, navigating the unraveling of the unbearable, a crazy revenge that could even twist other connections in this tangled story. As I continued my plan, I left small signals of my attention to Valentina. Each casual contact, each phrase spoken with a hint, brought me closer to my goal. Valentina began to respond genuinely. Her smile became less artificial, and her eyes shone with excitement. I could feel her beginning to play this dangerous game, and a conflict was developing inside me. Desire and hatred were tightly intertwined, giving birth to something new. Every night I forced myself to stay in that dark room with her lucid dreams. I could see how she desired my father on the one hand but was interested in me on the other, and it lit a fire in my chest. It was both unpleasant and intriguing. One evening Valentina decided to prepare a special dinner, decorating the kitchen with flowers and candles, as if she were having a romantic evening. I waited for the right moment to act, but when she spotted me at the table, her eyes sparkled. I couldn't help but notice as she took a step closer, her skirt gently touching the floor and her breathing like a melody, mesmerizing and exciting. "Do you think we should celebrate?" she uttered with a slight hint as she handed me my glass. I could feel her palm touching mine as she passed it, leaving a plume of electricity behind her. "Celebrating?" I echoed, running the tip of my tongue across my lips. For what exactly? In her eyes, I noticed the sincerity and seeming grogginess the atmosphere around us had fallen into. I knew it wasn't just a fluke, it was a game. I was part of her attempt to fill herself with something else. And yet, at the same time, I realized there was more to it than just a desire for gain. It was a desire for power, a thirst for validation. Day by day, the strain of certainty grew as I decided how to finalize my plan. It was terrifying that I could once again break the deception in front of all the people, completely innocent and away from cynical expectations. I placed my hand on her wrist, feeling the life pulsing, releasing the tension between us. She didn't pull away. Her delicate scent mixed with the comfort of home filled the room. "What if we let our hearts do the talking?" she uttered, and the phrase was a blow to the head. I caught myself suddenly beginning to listen to my desires. But what were those desires? I still wished for revenge. That night, Valentina and I had a special understanding. I didn't take off my vigilante mask, but I allowed myself to relax a little. I found certain traits in her that teased and piqued my interest. No matter how much she tried to show her confidence and ease, there was still an underlying and hidden tension between us. The evening came, full of conversation and light laughter that made me squirm. I always stayed on my guard and watched Valentina with determination. And then there was a knock on the door. It was my father coming home. The moment turned into a collision. Valentina looked at me with concern, and that expression froze in her eyes as she quickly drew herself to the window to see who was coming in. When he walked in, I blocked out the pain inside my chest. Every step he took brought a wave of hatred, the traitorous marrying her, leaving me and my mother alone with nothing. The conversation started quickly, chuckles, jokes, as if nothing had happened. I sat there, full of anger, but inwardly trying to keep everything crystal clear and composed. I watched my father put his arm around her waist, brushing the brilliance of her presence. It was insulting. I found a moment alone and decided enough was enough. Taking the liberty, I suggested, "Valentina, can we talk in private?" It was meant as an apology, but it was really an effort to get her to come clean. She looked at me willingly, and I felt interest play in her gaze. "Sure," she replied with a slight smile, rising. In that moment, everything changed. A heightened tension filled the space, and I felt her perceive me differently. I leaned closer, not knowing how it would happen, but an upheaval occurred inside me, bringing up feelings that maybe I shouldn't have. I couldn't hold back that desire, the desire to understand, to let myself escape, if only for brief moments, from anger to something more. I leaned closer, and before I could stop myself, I had my arms around her. There was something warm in her embrace, even though it felt like a betrayal. I realized I was writing my thoughts in the language of temptation, and it wouldn't change the reality I'd chosen. I wanted revenge, but I also realized how difficult it was to stay in this state of fear. She looked at me with infinity in her eyes, and in that moment, for the first time, I really saw her. There was a thirst in her, but also a slight note of doubt about what she had filled her life with. I moved closer, and we both stepped over that barrier, becoming part of something that could bring us together as one. Suddenly our lips met with a tension that hung in the air and burned every particle of space between us. There came that moment when hatred and passion intertwined in a light dance, and all contradiction became a mere mockery of fate. The world around us ceased to exist as our lips continued to seek comfort. But in that moment, a thought occurred to me. This wasn't just a physical attraction. This connection was a symbol of the deception I wanted to avoid. I was ready to seize all that had been cruelly lost, and looking back, I couldn't help but realize that I could no longer live in the shadow of my hatred and pain. Valentina shoved me away the moment she realized what was happening, and my vengeful plan seemed ready to evaporate. She stared at me with horror, and it was only in those seconds while I was paralyzed by her reaction that I realized that there were real feelings lurking beyond the bond, and they demanded answers. From that moment on, I knew. My journey was not just about revenge. It might be an opportunity for a new love, a new life, where everything would start with a clean slate. But I also realized that breaking up with Valentina couldn't be easy. These experiences changed both me and her. With every second spent in this intense dance, we both realized the truth and sincerity that lie in our hearts become a reserve on the road ahead. I would still fight for my mother, but now, being in the moment with Valentina, I realized that this whole story is about finding true love and freedom. When I returned home, I knew there were many challenges ahead, but my heart was ready for a new phase. I had finally found the strength to leave the shadow of betrayal and immerse myself in the light of a new morning, opening my heart to what really matters.